Hi there, my name is Krister Ungerböck, author of the #1 Wall Street Journal bestseller, 22 Talk Shifts, and former global tech CEO. Join us on the show where we're going to talk about how Stoicism may be ruining your leadership, what Fortune 500 leaders can learn from family business and long-haired ponytail guys, woo-woo ponytail guys, and why you should cry at work. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to part 2 of our delicious conversation with Krister Ungerböck. He is a leadership communication expert and keynote speaker and a former CEO of a global tech company. And he is, of course, the author of the Wall Street Journal bestseller, 22 Talk Shifts, Tools to Transform Leadership in Business, in Partnership, and in Life. And this has really been a wonderful first half of the show. If you caught it, great. If you didn't, you know where to go. Just click one episode back on whatever the platform is that you're listening to it on, because this is, I honestly think that we are talking about what is really important here. And where we finished up on the last part of part 1, we were talking about the context of language. And we talked about, Krister brought up the example of saying to Einstein, "You're an idiot." If Einstein didn't have the self image of himself as being a genius, that could be very hurtful. If he holds it clear that he's a genius, then it's like, oh, that's funny. It's a joke, right? So we were talking about this, the context of language, and oftentimes in the context of language, we think we're being funny or playful, but we haven't taken into consideration what is that person's image of themselves. And moreover, and this is where we're going to go now, what is the impact of what I'm saying in the context of the hierarchy of power? Because if somebody says you're an idiot and they're your mate, okay. But if somebody says you're an idiot and that person, or implies that you're an idiot, and that person has a lot of power, and you hold them in a hierarchy that is much greater than your own, that can be traumatic. So let's talk about the other side of that, Krister, which is the encouragement factor, because you also have that power differentiation that can be very useful.
Yeah. And so part of my story was ultimately the trauma that I went through was, growing up with a father who was, everything was wrong. And admittedly, like, okay, so I was a CEO, like cry me a river, like, it wasn't that bad. But ultimately my psyche, like, this is what created fueled my desire to always tell people what they were doing wrong and never telling them what they did right. Like, I so much so that somebody asked me like 10 years ago, when was the last time that you told someone good job? And I had to think, like, I don't know, it was a couple of months ago, because it was one of those things. I would say only tell people good job when they do something superhuman. And so what I realized is that as leaders, we have, especially knowing that many of our employees did possibly have a relationship with either a prior boss or a parent who was also highly critical. We can help heal not only them, but ourselves. So there was one of these exercises that I did with the kind of the woo-woo workshops. Someone I told them about my story. We all shared our stories for 2 or 3 days. And then the final exercise, somebody said, "Krister, get up and read what's on this card." So the person had understood my story, and you're going to read the card to someone sitting down. So it was kind of feeling like a parent-child, like the person was sitting at a level where they were like a 5 or 6-year-old child. And it said, I opened up the card and it said, "I am so proud of you." And so here's what I took away. What I realized is that saying the things that I never got as a child, that helped heal me.
Yes.
But it also helps to heal the others who may have had that same experience. So this is why I believe it's so important for leaders to understand. And I don't like the word trauma, because it always kind of like evokes for people who generally didn't have what psychologists call big T trauma, sexual or physical abuse or alcoholism. I didn't have any of that. I didn't realize I had this emotional trauma of not having an emotional connection with my father. in a family business, one of the things I've seen so frequently with family business owners and just general successful men especially, is we bring our children into our businesses. Sometimes like an intern or whatever. My dad asked me to start working at the business when I was 12, programming. And what I realize is so many men especially, but women do it as well, bring their children into the business because they don't know how to connect with their children any other way. And so my entire relationship with my father was built upon talking about business.
Yes.
And I never really got to develop an emotional relationship. My mother was the chief technology officer of our company. And our relationship, when I was young, it was actually based upon a lot of emotion. But in my adult years, it was solely around working together, me as the kind of second in command of the company and her as the chief technology officer. So we didn't have that true relationship anymore, for the personal relationship. And I realize now that ultimately modeling that, I was always the boss. I never really cared what people's kids' names were. I never really tried to connect emotionally with them. And ultimately, I think that's the key to being someone that people want to follow versus having a vision that people want to follow.
So this is very important, Krister, because it's central to my philosophy and the work I do. Is you, in order to heal, you must give what you needed.
Mm-hmm. Okay?
Yes,
exactly.
So I fully believe that. But there's also this other piece that I want to address, because a lot of people, you know this, we've talked about this before. A lot of people think they're aware, they're very unaware.
Mm-hmm.
They just think they're aware, they're not. I call them Popeye leaders, right? I am what I am, right? But they're not real. They don't not really self-aware. So they don't even know what they need. And that's the challenge. If I'd have said to you back in the day, while you were being really critical, what you needed was somebody to tell you, good job, I'm proud of you, you probably would have blown that off. So I've mentioned this many times on the show. Oftentimes we are writing books for people who won't read them. We're writing books for people who will read them, but they're not the people who actually should read it. So I want to look at this. I want to see if you and I can bring this over the edge here, because the person who just had to break down in the YMCA because they don't have a, emergency contact goes, I got to read this book. Yes. Yeah. But the person who's listened, hey, listen, I just made 300 million last year. We're doing great. I don't need this book. Yeah, you do. No, I don't. Honestly, I don't.
I love it. So I had no idea you were going to go there. So my first iteration of the book was going to be like, hey, I'm a jerk. Like, I'm a recovering jerk. And I went through this exact same thing. The jerks won't read it. So I spent years thinking about this problem. How do you get someone to read a book that they don't think they need to read? Right. So I want to there is one data point from Harvard Business Review about self-awareness. I thought it was a super self-aware person. It was 4 or 5 years ago, 95% of people think they're self-aware, yet 10 to 15% of people actually are when you ask the people around them. So all these people are like, oh, well, I'm not one of the not aware, self-aware people. Like, yeah, you probably are. The only way you know that is when you actually ask the people around you and they're like, no, you don't really do that. Not very frequently. Yeah, I maybe did it like once, like 5 years ago. And so the way I tried to solve this is I say talk shift, like you talked about the accountability partner. I will not notice my words for the most part. And so we need to have someone who's like our accountability partner who's going to say, hey, do you realize you use the word should, or like, talk shift number 12, and like literally correct us. I had an assistant when I was in Germany. She was amazing. She spoke French, German, and English fluently. And whenever I was practicing my French or German with her, she was like a teacher. She would just like nod and be like, she would correct me as I'm speaking, but not doing it in a way that I interrupted, just like you would a child, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, I would say you should do that. Like, let's do that, and so really following along these talk shifts, which are just simple rules that someone can be like, oh, when you said that, I believe what you meant to say was this. And so what we did to solve this problem, that the person who has the problem is often the last to read the book, is actually almost 50% of people buy more than one book when they buy them from the website.
Right.
Because having that accountability partner, and frankly, it is most often wives attempting to get their husbands to read the book. I mean, or we have people who are wanting to get their bosses to read it, and they'll be like, let me buy a couple for the team. And then maybe the boss will find it like just laying on their desks or whatever. But so we did two things to solve this problem. One, we created a video book. So the intention within the context of families, and there's a story like ultimately I read this book to my father, and it was the transformation in our relationship about a year before it was published. And about 3/4 of the way through, he said, I had no idea how my words hurt you. And that was the turning point, such that on the day that the book was published, my father and I were sitting there at my mother's grave. We buried a copy of the book and we had lunch. And I said to my dad, what would it look like if we were friends?
Wow.
And for the first time in my life, he's 79 years old. For the first time in my life, I went out and I hung out with my dad as a friend. And so I credit that process of experiencing the book together with that transformation. Now, I know that most people are not going to sit in like Tuesdays with Maury style, read a book to one another. So we created a video book. You can get it on your, Apple TV, Google TV, all the different smartphones, devices, and you can actually watch it together as a family to transform your communication. And I think that when people, often what we do is we market the book to unhappy wives who are typically often married to successful husbands. And they say, hey, here, honey, here's a leadership book. And oh, by the way, it'll help us be better parents and better communication in our marriage. Watch the video book together. And then, the boss takes it to work. And then they come back typically like a month later, like I want 10 copies, which you can also get on the website, because then they distribute it to all their team members at work. Now, when the book comes in, so somebody who has a difficult boss, this traumatizing boss, we flip that around. So you can actually go to talkshift.com/share if you buy the book. You can share any individual chapter of the video book with someone. So for example, there's a chapter about micromanaging. And I often get on Facebook comments like, where can I share chapter 9 with my boss? Well, you can go to talkshift.com/share. You can even share it anonymously. I am not condoning passive aggressive anonymous sharing of chapters via email, but sometimes, the end justifies the means. And so each of these chapters is like 8 to 12 minutes. I mean, it's shorter than a TED Talk. Right. And then you can use that one video chapter. So it's one of the first books that you can actually share chapter by chapter with anyone in your life to spark a shift in your communication. And so that was my solution for this bad bosses don't read books about becoming better bosses problem.
So in the video book, are you reading chapter 12 to the camera? Is it, in other words, is it verbatim or is it?
It is verbatim, but it has graphics. Obviously, it would be really boring to watch me,
no, I understand, but I'm just
graphics and additional things to help increase visual recall and things like that.
Wonderful.
For the most part, no one buys the video book by itself. They usually have the physical book or
of course
worksheet with it.
So one of the things that I want to address here, because I think that it's so. You and I chatted a little bit about this, and I've been writing a lot about this for the last couple of years. There is a huge, well, first of all, you and I talked about you had this journey, you were business, and then you went off on the spiritual personal development journey. I, on the other hand, was the other way around. Went off the spiritual personal development, psychology, and then into the business world. So we started at other ends of this spectrum. But the crossover point is, one of the things that I'm working on a massive project right now, and it's part of it is challenging the way that we see not only leadership, but the way we see capitalism in the form that it's in, right? I'm a capitalist, but not in the form that it's in. And I want to be clear in that one of the things that when I was on my journey, at the beginning of the 80s, it became very popular in the early 90s and even 2000s, was this idea of being Buddhist. And when I first started, it was 81 or something with that. I was with my Buddhist teacher and he said, "Oh yeah, you're a typical Western Buddhist." And I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "Well, you think that detachment is that you're not going to feel anything about something." And he goes, and he gave a story. I gave an example, and I have personal stories around it, but where, he'd get angry and he'd really feel the anger and then it was done. Right. So he said, it's not about detachment is about not carrying it. It's not about not feeling it. And so I now see this resurgence in the last 10 years. There's tons of books on it. Ryan Holiday has become very big with it around Stoicism.
Yeah.
And
so you were a Stoic Buddhist is what you sound like you were.
Right. And for me, all it is, I've written about it, I'm quite on fire about it these days, is stop with this philosophical bullshit as an excuse to not feel your feelings.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, I'm now got to use this to not feel, which is now justifying me being a stone cold killer.
Yeah.
Rather than I'm emotionally connected. I don't have to carry it around, but I can be emotionally connected.
So here, I've been thinking very similar thoughts, but so if you look up the definition of Stoicism, I may get it slightly wrong, but it's like to endure pain or whatever without complaining and without feeling. And so here's what I find is, especially business leaders, it's like, well, Stoicism, like that means I'm not going to show fear. I'm not going to show that I'm sad. I'm not going to show guilt. I'm not going to go shame. Like none of these. I don't say sorry because I don't want to be guilty. All these. But if we're gonna take the Stoicism philosophy, we need to take it 100%. There's one emotion that leaders are perfectly fine doing at work: anger.
Yep.
So if you're going to be a Stoic, don't be angry either. And so here's the thing. So the other thing I think we need to look at is like, I don't think anybody's looking at like, so how is Marcus Aurelius, like one of the leading, best Stoic writers, how is his marriage? Well, if you look at, because if Stoicism was so great for our personal relationships, then like Marcus Aurelius probably had a great marriage. Well, when you do the research, there's not a lot of, it's a long time ago, there's not a lot of writing. Well, she just tried to kill him a couple times. She had affairs. She attempted a coup. Probably Marcus Aurelius didn't have a great marriage. So maybe Stoicism is not the best way for us to lead in the context of a business or in the context of family.
Yeah. I love that you went to that because, like I said, it's a pet peeve for me because it's simply another excuse to not be emotionally present. And being emotionally present means, okay, if you're going to go, okay, I'm all right with the anger, then you've also got to be all right with the joy. You've got to be okay with the sadness. You've got to be okay with all of it. And if you're going to be a Buddhist, as my Buddhist teacher told me, feel everything 100% in the space you're in until you can leave it behind. Don't leave. Yeah. So if you're angry in this point, in this house right now, feel this anger right now in this place. And when you take one step away, that's where you're leaving it.
Well, so that comes to like, I think it's chunk shift 18 or 19. I put it purposely towards the end of the book is, and with your psychology background, is that anger is not a primary emotion. No. It's a secondary emotion. And so I was actually literally just angry with my wife last night, and I was taking the dog out and I said, okay, and this is the question that I pose in the book. I said, okay, what's the emotion behind my anger? Is it hurt? Is it sadness? Is it guilt? Is it shame? Is it fear? And so this is a multiple choice question. Like all of the talk shifts are like, ask yourself this question. You don't pick any, you only have these 5 choices and you pick whichever one is close. So I was like, well, I guess hurt is probably the one. And it was a minor thing. She was out with a friend. She showed up 2 hours late. No big deal. Right. But so I felt a little disrespected. But the ultimate thing is like asking myself the question whenever I feel anger. But then the other thing is it shifts how we see others. when somebody else is angry, when our boss is angry, when our wife is angry, when somebody else is angry, we can say, I wonder what emotion they're experiencing behind their anger. Is it fear? Is my boss afraid that project that I turned in late or without a high level of quality, is he afraid he's going to get fired? Is he afraid that he's not going to be able to give bonuses to everyone? Is he afraid we're going to lose a customer? And so I start to shift how I perceive others' anger. And so that's all of these talk shifts, not all of them, most of them are things we can use both on ourselves, but we can also use them in reverse with others.
And that's what I love about it.
Perception.
See, that's what I love about it, because, you know, when you talk about the HBR research of people not being self-aware, is, there's a lot of talk about emotional intelligence. And I say to people, I love that you've read the book. I love that you're using it with your people, but you got to use it on yourself, dude. Don't be a therapist who's not done therapy. Don't be, heal thyself, right? I mean, it's that same thing as, what you've laid out in the book so well is that these are things to not only make you a better leader with others, but make you a better leader with yourself. And it's a healing process. And one of the things we talked about in our men's work for years was, you're not angry. That was the title of it. You're not angry. So what are you?
Yeah. I love
that. And people go, but I am angry. Yeah, I know, I can see that.
Oh, no, here's what I hear. You'll recognize this. I'm frustrated. Well, frustrated is just in the anger family. That's why it's a multiple choice question. Sad, sad, afraid. And then it'd say, oh, I'm not frustrated. And this way in bosses, well, frustrated's in the anger family. Well, so what emotion are you experiencing? I'm disappointed. Also in the anger family. So we got to just get out of that. And for me, I knew a lot of this intellectually. And it wasn't until I said, hey, this is the multiple choice question with only these answers are available. You must pick one, that I started to kind of get beyond this, what's really the emotion I'm experiencing.
Yeah. But again, now we're back to this escape route via Stoicism or whatever it might be, which is, I don't do feelings, and I'm one of the things I say to people, I've written lots about this, is, do you understand that you're not a rational person? Oh, I am. I'm very rational. No, you're not. Mm-hmm. You tell yourself rational lies. That's why you call it rationalization. But the truth of the matter is, you, me, adults, humans, we are emotional first. Our emotional brain is far faster than our logical brain. So we've already come to an emotional decision. We're just going to rationalize our emotional decision and repress the emotion that went with it by being a Stoic or a Buddhist or whatever the heck it is you want to call yourself. And it's, so for me, and I really wanted to address this with you and want you to sort of have your input on this. How do we get leaders to become comfortable with the plethora of emotions? Because many of them are terrified of their own emotions. They're terrified of what that means. If I get emotional, and they do, I've heard, you've probably heard this too. In my private work, I've heard a guy say, and actually heard women say it too, if I cry, I don't know if I'd stop. Mm-hmm. And what all that's telling me is, wow, there's so much pain.
Yeah, I think that the first, so I think there's two separate things. One, I'm kind of working on a business case for feelings at work. So there's a whole separate,
right.
But I mean, I think the first time I cried in front of my employees was 2008. And there were actually, admittedly, there were two reasons. Sometimes I would do all hands meetings and I would tear up. And some people come why did you get teared up? You were talking about some business initiative. And I've always been kind of passionate about words and trying to be eloquent, whether it's speaking. And I realized, it took me actually almost 10 years to realize, the reason I was getting teared up is because I was proud of myself in that moment. And I was actually teared up because my father never told me that I was proud. He was proud of me. So I was actually kind of, in some ways, kind of giving myself,
yourself.
Yeah. But the interesting thing, so coming back to showing emotion or showing feelings at work, and I do think there's a language thing here that I think that for men at least, showing emotion versus showing feelings feels a little more manly. So I think there's a subtle thing of like not talking about feelings, but talking about showing emotion. But I think that it's something they just do by trial and error. Because what I found, it was the same thing I found when I first started giving people positive feedback and encouragement. Coach said, Krister, I just want you to give 3 pieces of positive feedback every single day. Just, you could comment somebody's shirt. And so it was when I started doing it, I saw how people reacted. And so what I see is leaders who reveal that I'm afraid instead of angry, or possibly do get, are moved to tears. See how it impacts people. See how many people come up to you and say, wow, that was so powerful. Thank you for sharing what was really on your mind. I actually there's a little bit of bonus content that's only in the video book, but I talk about this thing about how part of the times when I read the video book, I actually might get teared up. And it's about how as parents, we need to teach our children how to cry. Yeah. And like, they say like boys don't cry. I love The Cure and that song, Boys Don't Cry, being from the UK, probably. Yeah.
Love The Cure, man.
And so we need to start teaching our children, our little boys and our little girls, how to cry like men. And like when you cry, for me, crying like a man is not hiding your tears and looking away. It's looking directly into the eyes of the person and letting the tears come down your face, and just knowing that if the other person looks away, the reason they're looking away is because they're uncomfortable with your emotion. And crying like a man and like letting it out is okay. Don't be embarrassed, because the people who look away are the people who aren't comfortable showing their emotion. And so I think that this thing of showing compassion and showing our emotion, showing our emotion, not feelings, is about trying it and seeing whether it works for you.
Yeah, I love that. I think you've really hit some very solid, important points. And one of the things I've done to challenge, particularly when I get a macho person, because, I always say to people, look at his face. Does this look like a softie? Right? I mean, I've built this physiology, and I've built this physiology to cover up the feelings. Mm-hmm. So I understand the mechanism. I get what the protective mechanism looks like. But I say, describe somebody who is about to go into battle. What do you describe their face as? And they'll go through it, and I'll say, now describe their eyes. And they're focused, and they're right in there. And I go, now feel the feeling, feel the emotion, and have that face. Have that sturdy, focused, committed to being with, and see what happens. And that is feeling like a man. Mm-hmm. Or as you would say, crying like a man, being with it, with that same level of determination. And I said, it will destroy your enemy, and it will melt the shields of everybody who stands in front of you. Not to defeat them, but to remove the shields and actually have you dissolve into each other, have you connect with each other. And I really want to thank you for your enormous generosity of spirit, your wisdom, your journey, which is, you and I could talk so much more about this. There's a lot more to unpack here. I always like to finish with what is something very, I'm going to ask you again to tell people where they can find out more about you and all the rest, but always want to finish on something practical. What's the one piece of practical guidance you would like to give our listeners, our viewers, that they could go away, preferably do in the next 5 minutes, definitely within the next 24 hours? What would that be?
So there's two quick ones from the book. One is start asking questions that only start with the word what or how. It will change your conversations forever. Forget anything. Start what or how, nothing else. Second, which is a little bit more detailed, is asking questions on a scale of 1 to 10. And what I want you to do is do it with an exaggerated scale. So just maybe one simple question. Ask 5 people around you in the next 24 hours on a scale of 1 to 10, how is our communication? And I want to ask you specifically this way. 10 being our communication is better than anyone in the world, anyone you've heard about, anyone that's 10. 1 is our communication is worse than anyone you've ever heard, whether it's your spouse, your people in your work. And so I say that this question is part of what Talk Shifts is about. Let's talk about our words, the ones we're saying, the ones we're, and most importantly, the ones we're not. That question gives words to those seeking their voice and courage to those seeking their volume. Because if I say, hey, boss or husband or wife, our communication is a 7 on that scale, that's actually not that bad because we're comparing to the best in the world. But the follow-up question is, what's the difference between a 7 and a 9 for you? And now what should we start do? What can we start doing or stop doing to improve our communication? And I think that if you read the book, that you'll find some specific tools that you can use, but just opening up the conversation. On the other side, what you'll find is when people who are on the negative side of that scale, so maybe your wife or your husband thinks you have terrible communication, she will be like, well, we're not a 1 because he's not that bad, not a 2, not a 3, not a. So, hey, you know what? A 4 is better than saying, do you think we have good communication? And then your wife or your husband says, no.
Right.
That's a 0. Right?
It's an absolute.
You're basically just dug even deeper, a deeper hole for your relationship. So it, on both ends of the scale, it results in a more productive mindset moving forward. And so that's Talk Shift number 5.
Fabulous. Thank you. So again, please tell our audience where they can find out more about you. I believe they can go to krister.com. Is that correct?
That's my speaking site.
Okay.
But the best place to buy the book and get the video book is talkshift.com.
Talkshift.com. And as I said, we will make sure that we post all of the links to find out more about Krister, to find out about his book. We'll also post where you can find out about his speaking and all of the social media outlets where you can find out more about him. And, Krister, again, I just want to say a huge thank you to you, sir. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for all that you've shared today. It has been a joy and a pleasure. And for you, dear listener, I want you to know that you can hang out with other conscious leaders. You can chat about this episode that you've been listening to. You can talk about other past episodes inside of our Facebook and our LinkedIn groups. Just look for the Leadership and Loyalty podcast. The truth of the matter is, it doesn't matter how successful you are. If your employees and your customers don't understand what gives you and your company meaning, you're only working at a fraction of your capability. To find out how you can hire me, Dov Baron, as a speaker or leadership strategist for yourself or your organization, go to dovbaron.com. Because unified, actualized meaning is the one single monolithic difference between mediocrity and greatness for all individuals and companies. I want to thank you for sharing this show with everyone you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about the shifts you need to make in the way that you talk. Maybe you could use 22 talk shifts. I'm Dov Baron. I'm here to assist you tapping into the deepest meaning to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and your leadership impact. And I am out.